I would love for you to subscribe to my channel. I have lots of different episodes, lots of different series. It's not just all on composition and rhetoric. And take care. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Any questions, let me know. Thank you for watching.
Hi everyone, it's Walter Bound here. So, in talking about The Great Gatsby, one character that oftentimes gets overlooked is Jordan Baker. She is really important to the plot, and she's important as the antithesis in a way of Daisy, but also very similar to Daisy. She is the bridge. She is the archetype of the 1920s independent female who doesn't need a rich husband. She's rich, but she goes from guy to guy to guy. She's a professional golf player, and if we take a look, and okay, I'm going to take a look at how Fitzgerald describes her, we can see that she is the prototype of the 1920s female, bit of a femme fatale in a way, but let's take a look, because Jordan Baker has some of the best lines in the novel, and it's important to understand Fitzgerald's characterization of Jordan along with Daisy and some of the minor characters like Catherine and Mrs. McKee and of course Myrtle. And we can ask, is there any woman in this novel that comes out well? There's not too many men, right? But let's talk about Jordan Baker, right? Number one, Jordan Baker's name in itself it could be female, it can be male, okay? Because it's the 1920s, Jordan is doing many things that men would traditionally do, like be a professional golf player, right? Date a variety of guys and just float in between East Egg and West Egg, and she kind of just is this kind of, like mythical creature, this butterfly that flirts from thing to thing to thing, or from place to place. Okay, we first see them in chapter 1, right? We first see Jordan, and she's with Daisy as if they're floating, right? On above the couch, and they were just anchored, like they're like floating like a balloon that's been attached to something anchored. They're both in white, of course, that connects with Daisy, and they're just rippling and fluttering around like a butterfly, but it's a butterfly that's like tied down. And Nick says she was a stranger to me. She was motionless. Her chin was raised a little, as if she was balancing something on it, which was likely to fall. Think of like if you kind of like tilt your head up, right? And it makes it seem like she's a little, like she's very snooty. Like just take your head and then just kind of like just think about balancing something on your chin. Nick could say she seemed a bit of a snob to me, but this characterization is much better. Balancing something on which it was likely to fall. She raised her chin up a little, like, hey, what's going on, kind of thing, right? And we see on page 9 of my copy of Gatsby, she hinted in a murmur that the surname of the bouncing girl was Baker. All right, this is Daisy saying. And Nick says Miss Baker's lips fluttered. She nodded at me almost imperceptibly, like it's like, I recognize you, but I'm not really recognizing you. It was like, and then quickly tipped her head back again. The object she was balancing had obviously tottered a little. So he goes back to that image of that chin, right? And it given her something of a fright. Again, a sort of apology arose to my lips, right? Like he's apologizing. Why would Nick be apologizing, right? And then we see we see Miss Baker again when Tom says, I'd be a goddamn fool to live anywhere else but, in New York. And the first thing Miss Baker says is absolutely, right? And even Jordan seems shocked at this, right? And then she yawns with a series of rapid, deft movements and then stood up in the room. And then she says, I'm stiff. I've been lying on that sofa for as long as I can remember. Here we have, like, in a way, the idle rich. They're so rich. They don't go shopping at ShopRite. They don't take care of children. They don't, mop floors and do dishes and, no. They're just, I've been just lying on the sofa for as long as I can remember. All right? And then it's like, oh, we should go to New York. And Miss Baker says, no thanks, I'm absolutely in training. We don't really know what she's in training for right now, but we'll know later that she's a golf player, right? And then Nick, captivated by Jordan, I looked at Miss Baker, wondering what she got done. Like, what would this woman ever get done? She just dresses in white and lounges and flutters above a divan, a sofa. And he says, I enjoyed looking at her. She was a slender, small-breasted girl with an erect carriage, and she accentuated by throwing her body backward at the shoulders like a young cadet. Right? That's significant. All right? The ideal prototype in the 1920s was a woman who was not big-breasted, someone that was small-breasted. Women would actually flatten themselves to appear more appealing to men. All right, so a young cadet's like a West Point cadet, and she's slender. She throws her body backward like a young cadet. So even her name is Jordan, which could be male or female, and even the way she holds herself and walks around as if she's a soldier. And then her gray, sun-strained eyes look back at me with polite, reciprocal curiosity. All right, very interesting there, that her eyes are gray, but sun-strained. We get that a lot with Daisy. And she's polite, but it's kind of like, I'm not really interested, because wan, charming, and discontented face. When you have three adjectives, it's the third adjective that's the most important. And it's charming, but it's disconnected. All right. It occurred to me now that I'd seen her, or a picture of her somewhere. He says, I can't picture it. I know I've seen her. And she says, you must know Gatsby if you live in West Egg. And it's Jordan, out of all the characters, that floats easily amongst the wealthy of West Egg and the wealthy of East Egg. All right. So she's the only character that kind of knows the West Egg people, but really is part of the East Egg people. Daisy and Tom would never ever go to West Egg, and when they do, we'll see what happens. But she's the one that can float around, all right? Again, like this balloon or like this butterfly. Nick says, slenderly, languidly, their hands set lightly on their lips. So, using these adverbs, slenderly, languidly, and then we see her on page 12, Miss Baker talked at once, unobtrusively, with a bantering inconsequence. Right? Again, these oxymorons are all over the place in Gatsby. And their white dresses. So Miss Baker, they're talking at once, bantering of inconsequence, quiet chatter, impersonal eyes, in the absence of all desire. So we're getting a picture here of someone who is pretty self-absorbed. Impersonal, inconsequential, recognizing you but not really recognizing you. And she says on page 13, you ought to live in California. I'm sorry. This is when Tom is going on about all his crazy, white nationalism stuff, and she just wants to change the subject. But Tom just keeps going on. And then, on page 14, Miss Baker and I exchanged a short glance consciously devoid of meaning. Again, all these paradox, right? That Nick and Miss Baker exchange a glance devoid of meaning. All right, consciously devoid of meaning. How can you be conscious of something, aware of something? But it's very interesting. That's what Gatsby, Fitzgerald does all the time. And Miss Baker is surprised that Nick doesn't know that Tom has a mistress. Again, Miss Baker, who floats in all different circles, knows this. She knows the scandal. that Tom's got some woman. And then she says she might have the decency not to telephone him at dinner time. Do you think that it's indecent to be having an affair, but it's really indecent to telephone him at dinner time? So we see the lack of morality here. Miss Baker is not saying Tom is wrong and should stay faithful to, my good friend Daisy. It's just indecent, not to telephone at dinner time, right? And then we see Jordan again on page 18, right, when she finally says, it's 10 o'clock, it's time for this good girl to go to bed. I mean, is that a paradox? Is she a good girl, right? And then Daisy says, oh, Jordan's going to play in a tournament tomorrow over at Westchester, right? This is Goff. Westchester is a suburb of New York. Well, a suburb, it's north of New York. Very, very wealthy area. And then he finally says, oh, you're Jordan Baker. He finally gets it, right? And then Nick says, I knew now why her face was familiar. It's pleasing, contemptuous expression. Here's another negative adjective to describe. It's pleasing, but contemptuous, right? So again, it's oxymoron. And there was a critical, unpleasant story about her kicking a golf ball. You got to play the ball where it lands, and you don't kick the ball because that's, wrong. And Daisy says, and then she says, I'll see you anon. That word, anon, is very pretentious. Not see you later, I'll see you guys. But if you were to tell your friends, see you anon, right? It's very affected, like I'll see you at some point in the future, right? But it's very British, I'll see you anon, right? And then Daisy's like, oh, I'm just going to hook you guys up. I'll arrange a marriage. But because it's the 1920s, and that's not really kind of like cool, I'll just fling you together, right? I'll lock you up in a linen closet and push you out to sea in a boat, that sort of thing. So Daisy's just having fun. She wants to get her cousin Nick and Jordan to hook up, right? And we'll see what happens. Of course, they do in chapter 3. And then Tom says, she's a nice girl, right? And we have to wonder if that's actually true. Her family is rich, and she has one aunt that's 1,000 years old. And she says, oh yeah, we're both from Louisville. Our white girlhood was passed together. Our beautiful white. So this is where, of course, Daisy and Jordan are together, right? Jordan took one path, independence, not getting married. And Daisy got married and is now stuck with Tom. And Daisy and Jordan can just float around and be like a hip 1920s girl. Right. And that is Jordan in chapter 1. Chapter 3, she becomes even more significant. So let's take a look at chapter 3, where Jordan, she's not in chapter 2, but she comes back at Gatsby's party in chapter 3. All right, so Nick is at the party. He's, he doesn't know anybody at this party, right? And suddenly he sees Jordan, and he's happy. Oh, I finally see somebody, and it's Jordan, right? And Jordan Baker came out of the house and stood at the head of the marble steps, again symbolizing her dominance, right? She's standing at the head of the marble steps, leaning a little backward and looking with contemptuous interest down into the garden. There's that word contemptuous again, because she's looking over West Egg and the party, and she knows she's above these people. She's, the 1%ers. She was born wealthy, and she's just here for a good time, right? She's above them, looking down into the garden, all right? So that is very important characterization. She's at the party, but she's above the party and above these types of, crazy, loose, moral kind of, nouveau riche people. And she held my hand impersonally. There's an adverb there that shows, again, a negative characterization of Jordan. And I'm like, I'm going to hold my hand. I'll be back. I got some things to do, but I'll be right back to you. And then we have descriptions of her slender, there's that word again, slender, golden arm resting on mine. We descended the steps and sauntered into the garden. So now Nick is happy because he's with this beautiful woman, and he feels like, since I'm with her, I'm getting some of her power, right? And she meets girls there. I'm like, do you come to these parties often? And the girls, right, remember her, but she doesn't remember them, right? So again, it shows that Jordan is not really aware or really cares about other people, but other people recognize her, right? And it's really all about Jordan Baker, right? And then here is another example of how East Egg condescends to West Egg. And Jordan invited me to join her own party. So there's this huge party, and then there's the separate party around a table, and these are all East Eggers, right? And they were married couples, and Jordan was there with an undergraduate, some dude, and Jordan was going to yield up her person, which I take as like she hasn't really slept with him yet, but eventually this undergraduate dude was hoping, but she's kind of like ditched him for Nick. And instead of the rambling of the party, this little mini East Egg party is now more dignified. It's not the craziness that we see going on at Gatsby's party. So it's East Egg condescending to West Egg. So even within Gatsby's party, we have a separate party happening where the snobs reside, right? And then Jordan then criticizes her own East Egg people by saying, let's get out. You know, this is much too polite for me. Like, you know, she has some great lines. And Nick, continuing in the party, I was still with Jordan Baker, and then he starts chatting with someone. Of course, it's Gatsby. And after talking with Gatsby for a little bit, he says, oh, he just told me he was an Oxford man. He's just a man named Gatsby. That's all he is. He throws parties, and that's why I like him. And that's why everyone likes him. He throws large parties, and we don't really know too much about him, but we don't care. We just drink his drinks and eat his meals, and he throws large parties. And then she says this great line, I like large parties. They're so intimate. Notice the paradox. At small parties, there isn't any privacy. So if you're at a party of 200 people, you could do things and no one's going to notice. If you're at a party of like 6 or 7 people and you disappear with somebody, yeah, they're going to take notice, all right? But again, Jordan Baker has such great lines. And it's a plot device that Fitzgerald uses that Gatsby wants to talk to Jordan. We don't know the reason. All right, it keeps us in suspense for a while. And Miss Baker, I beg your pardon, but Mr. Gatsby would like to speak with you alone. With me? She exclaimed in surprise. We have no idea what's going on. Again, it's for the plot, and it's also to create suspense of what could be the reason this guy she doesn't even know wants to speak with her alone. Right? Yeah, I forgot to mention that he watches her, right? Her evening dress, of all her dresses, looks like sports clothes, right? So she's always like, even though she's dressed up for this party, she's still dressed like a sports star. And there's this jauntiness about her movements, as if he's like first learned to walk on golf courses. Think of the characterization there, like you first learned to walk on a golf course. Talk about affluenza, talk about privilege on clean, crisp mornings. And then she comes back after leaving Nick there by himself to being awkward. I've just heard the most amazing thing. It was just amazing. But again, Fitzgerald's not going to tell us right away. You know, you need to keep the energy and the intrigue of this mysterious man to keep you reading, right? And then we see Jordan on 57 in my copy. For a while, I lost sight of Jordan Baker, right, in the summer. So the summer goes, he's working in New York, bonds. Some time goes by. And then he says, in the midsummer, I found her again. Again, this is 1922. I was flattered to go places with her because she was a golf champion. A picture like being the boyfriend of Serena Williams. You know, it's like, oh, everyone knows Serena Williams, and I'm like her boyfriend, or I'm the guy she's with right now. And he says, I wasn't actually in love, but I had a tender curiosity about her. The bored, haughty face, again, these are two negative adjectives, bored, haughty face, that turned the world, concealed something. Most affectations conceal something eventually, even though they don't in the beginning. And one day I found what it was. I found out what it was about her, right? About this big golf tournament, and that she moved a ball in the semi-round. And Jordan Baker, says Nick, avoided clever, shrewd men. Well, that should be a clue that this may or may not work with Nick, because she says she was incurably dishonest. And then Fitzgerald / Nick says something that may be a bit sexist, saying, dishonesty in a woman is a thing you never blame deeply. Like if, a girl says, oh, I weigh 120 and really she's 135. Well, or, whatever, right? So that might be a sexist comment, but it is, 1925 that Fitzgerald's writing this. And this is the thing that Jordan is really interesting. He says, you're a rotten driver, I protest. I said, you drive crazy. And Jordan's like, well, they just have to keep out of my way. It takes two to make an accident. And then she says, well, suppose you meet someone just as careless as yourself. And she says, I hope I never will. I hate careless people. Think about the irony of that. She's so careless, but she hates the very people who she is. Like, she's careless, but she hates careless people. And then Grace, sun-strained eyed again. That comes back again. So Fitzgerald's using these symbols and these descriptions and this imagery again to create this unity. And she stared straight ahead. Yeah, Jordan is not going to be someone who's checking her rear view mirrors, right? It's like, I care about me, and that's it. And at that moment, he says, for a moment, I thought I loved her, right? And what I just noticed is Fitzgerald uses the word shifted with a standard shift. I mean, now most people drive automatics, but it used to be you'd have to shift, a stick shift, and they're driving. So it's using the verb to correlate with the action in not just driving, but in the relationship between Nick and Jordan. And then he needed to go back to break things off with this, like, there was this girl in the past, back in the Midwest, that he had to break things off with, because he doesn't want to get married. And he says, I'm one of the few honest people I've ever known. So if he's, like, really, really honest, and she is so dishonest, this may not be a relationship that works, but hey, it's the 1920s, it's a different time, and let's, pay attention to Jordan Baker, because she is emblematic of the 1920s. More so, I would say, than Daisy, because Daisy does not have the liberties and the freedom that Jordan does. She'll get a taste of it, but then we'll see what happens at the end. Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.